Calcutta Cup is back in England's hands after this 13 points to 6 win over Scotland in the Six Nations. A bit of a weird game because boy was it wet. It was unbelievably wet and very, very windy. Atrocious conditions. And the main camera never does it justice. It's only when you see those cameras that are on the actual ground that you can see just how bad the weather was. I believe there was a bit of a storm, but either way, that certainly affected the play. It's part of the reason the game was relatively low scoring, and there were sure a fair few errors. Too many of them on Scotland's side. Scottish fans will be kind of ruining some of those errors, but yeah, I'll go over the game. Some of the key points I noted down, and you guys can let me know your thoughts as well. So, as I said, it was pretty wet. I did get up to watch this one. It was on at like 5:45 in the morning here in New Zealand. So I got up to watch from about the second minute. I set my alarm early enough this time to just get there in time. And yeah, Scotland went like 14 phases early. Eventually England won a turnover. And England winning turnovers was partially going to be the story of the game. England were putting massive pressure on Scotland. They were kicking them high balls. They were kicking it down the wings. They were just making Scotland play in their own half, and in those wet conditions trying to test them to see if they would make errors. They did make a few. But yeah, it was a lot of pressure on the Scottish guys very early on. England missed the first penalty. The wind probably held it up, you'd have to say. And they did kick one, though, a couple minutes later to make it 3-0. The first 20, you could really see Scotland's line-out struggling. They kept throwing it to the back or throwing it to the middle when it's one of those days when you probably need to just throw it to the front, and England, well, your opposition is going to contest it because it's obvious where you're going to go, but it certainly wasn't the day for anything fancy because the wind was just ripping the ball, even if it was thrown straight, it was ripping it onto the wrong side. 26 minutes, Farrell misses another penalty, and again, you won't see him kick that badly probably for a while, but the wind was just doing crazy things with the ball. Eventually, England did stop going for three. At one point, they kicked for touch, and then their line-out struggled. So, conditions, man, in that first half were pretty painful. Ford even went for a drop goal, which was an interesting decision. The commentator said, good choice, but I was like, man, in these conditions, that's brave. It didn't make it, and that's how it was at halftime. It was 3-0. Yeah, it was pretty low scoring, but the conditions, man. The halftime stats, run meters were 111 to 135 in favour of England. Kicks were 20 to Scotland. This is kicks from hand, and 29 to England. So there was a lot of kicking on, and that was just the conditions. Possession, England 55% and 53% territory. Scotland's tackling stats in the first half were amazing, 98%. They made 57 out of 58 tackles. You won't see that very often in 40 minutes of rugby. 89% for England, which is still very good, 54 out of 61. But Scotland's line out in that first half, 5 out of 10, 50%. They needed to correct it earlier than they did. England were 5 from 7, which is, again, not great, but given the conditions, it's certainly better than 5 from 10. Second half, Scotland do get a good period of pressure, and they managed to get 3 points from it, so it's 3 apiece. Hogg, at one point, goes on one of the runs of the game. Like, there's not a lot of really dangerous moments in the game, but Hogg has one of them. He is in his own 22. He shapes to kick. Farrell's kind of closing him down, but he sees that he's overcommitted, so Hogg goes around him. He steps Joseph. He goes back forward. It was just silky stuff. Eventually, I think he kicks it forward, but eventually the Scots knock it on from memory. So, yeah, and then England keep kicking out on the full. Like, England have gone in with the second half with the tactic of kicking it more, but the wind, I think, is at their backs in the second half, and it just keeps going out on the full. It happens like 3 times in a row. The commentators on my feed actually mentioned that, like, if this was not being played at a massive stadium, if it was just being played at some park on the side of the road, that you'd think these guys are amateurs with the amount of errors that were happening. But conditions, man, really bad. 65 minutes, England win a scrum penalty. They opt for the 3 points. They miss. Again, the goal kicking was not a good thing for England this week. 68 minutes was another one of those heart-in-your-mouth moments for Stuart Hogg. After last week, you thought surely nothing bad can happen with him. England kick it through, and he goes back to clean it up. The ball looks like it's going to dribble over the goal line so he can touch it down for a 22 dropout. But the ball just holds up enough that he's not quite sure. He goes to force it, but he ends up carrying it back. And you weren't even sure if he'd actually forced it or lost control of it and just knocked it backwards, because then from a loose ball, Farrell puts his hand down on it and forces it. So if it's just a knock back, then it's going to be a try to England, which given the conditions look like that could be enough to win the game. But the TMO looks at it and rules, fortunately for Stuart, that he got it forced just enough. So, they didn't award an England try there, but they did rule that he'd carried it back. So they had a 5-metre scrum, and from that, Genge gets his try. So it didn't immediately cost the points, but perhaps you could say in a roundabout way it did. They go a few phases after a scrum. Genge is an angry man. Looks like he's got some, there was some footage of him on Twitter just when he was in his under 20s, and he just likes running into blokes, doesn't he? That's what he does, man. So he goes over for a try. There's a bit of handbags after that. It's 10 points to 3. England kick a penalty on 76 to really put it out of touch to make it 13-3. But then Hastings, whose number is falling off the back of his jersey, it must have just been that wet that the glue or whatever is just lost. He kicks one in return to make it 13-6, so there's still a bit of time for Scotland to maybe draw it at their death, but they can't get it done. They're in their own half, and Scotland need to box kick it and maybe try to regather it, but the kick's weak, and England just closed the game out. So 13 points to 6. It's not going to be a game remembered for particularly any silky skills or amazing moments like that. It'll be remembered for the weather. I can't imagine many people wanting to go back and watch it again, but you never know. If you want to watch some guys playing under the high pressure of terrible conditions, then this is the game to watch. Run meters were 277 to 220. That's in Scotland's favour. The possession and territory actually ended up going Scotland's way with 55% possession and 60% territory. But some key areas for Scotland where you got to be pretty frustrated. Knock-ons, Scotland 13, England 2, even in those conditions. Turnovers conceded, which includes knock-ons, 20 to Scotland, England 7. You look at some of the good stuff. Scotland clean breaks 5, England 2. Defenders beaten, Scotland 14, England 5. So Scotland are doing enough, but they're just making mistakes. Lineouts, Scotland 57%, 11 from 19. Even in these conditions, England 83%, 10 from 12. They missed those 2 in the first half. Second half, they're all good. Underhill got man of the match. So a bunch of tackles and turnovers and whatnot. Tackling percentage for both sides was pretty high. 94 for Scotland. They made 83 tackles. 91 for England. 148 tackles. Just better management of the game, I guess. Penalties conceded 8 by Scotland, 6 by England. So England's Six Nations is back on track. Calcutta Cup is back after a couple of years away. So yeah, Scotland fans will be pretty disappointed. It's another game where they were in it right up until the end, but still managed to end up as the losing side. Kinghorn had 58 run meters, which was the most of anyone in this game. It was always going to be pretty hard to rack up run meters in those conditions. 3 defenders beaten for him. Itoje had 22 out of 23 tackles, which is another massive shift from him as well. So yeah, when we resume, Scotland will travel to Italy, and they have to win that game. Otherwise, surely Gregor Townsend's job is on the line, man. Come on. And England are at home to Ireland, which at this point is looking like a massive game, given England have to win it and Ireland are unbeaten. So, yeah, we'll see how things go. You guys let me know your thoughts on the game. How did you think this one went? Do you think England, based on this performance, it's really hard to judge, but can you see them going and winning the rest of their games? Scotland, apart from the game against Italy, will they cause any other stirrings for other sides, or do you think it's going to be another long Six Nations for them? 2 rounds gone for these teams. Still got France and Italy to go in this round. But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later. Remember, guys, if you're looking for any Six Nations supporters gear, England Rugby Store has got gear of all the Six Nations teams. You can even get 10% off if you use the code 2cents10 when you're at the checkout. England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, France, and even the very slick looking Italy jerseys. They've got them all at England Rugby Store. Like I said, when you get to the checkout, apply the discount code 2cents10. That's all one word, and 10 is the number 1 and the number 0. You use that and you'll get 10% off whatever the price is here. Check it out, guys.